37. This is number 8. We're studying now the divided kingdom of Israel. And last week, our last lesson, we were looking at the Lord using Syria, his rod of chastisement. His people, the northern kingdom of Israel, had become idolaters. And because things got much worse during the administration of these three men here, the Lord sent Syria. He gave Syria the ability to overpower the northern kingdom. And they took about half the kingdom. They took about half the land. The point is God chastises his own people. When his own people stop listening to him, then he's going to chastise them. Common sense. It's what we do with our children. When our children misbehave, we chastise them. Why? Because we're trying to help them learn to be better. And the Lord does the same thing with his children. He chastises. He'll do it as an individual. He'll do it as a church. He'll do it as a nation, like in this case right here. He's not going to just let us destroy ourselves without fighting for us. He fights for our sake by permitting us to suffer. So many times when tragedy strikes us, we feel like God has abandoned us. And the fact of the matter is, he may be calling to us. He may be trying to get us to look up. We haven't been looking up. He could let us go and self-destruct, or he can let us suffer for a short time in the hopes that we'll have a change of attitude, just like we do with our kids. And sometimes, just like our kids do, they get mad, they get puffed up, and sometimes God's people get puffed up. They take it the wrong way. They take it as though God has abandoned them, when that's not the case at all. This historical record of the Old Testament is designed to teach us all these things. That's why God has preserved it all these years. But we've got to absorb the information and understand what's going on. God isn't chastising them because he hates them. He's doing it because he loves them. He permitted Syria to overpower them out of love. It's what B.R.'s grandmother used to say. You don't spank a child because you hate him, you spank him because you love him. Well, that's what God does, the same thing. But sometimes, maybe most of the time, because we don't understand that, and we get angry with the Lord, who's actually trying to help us. That's what they did too. They got angry with God because they felt left out. The Syrians beat down the northern kingdom at this time. And the record says in 2 Kings 13:7, there was not left to Jehoahaz an army of more than 50 horsemen. That's all he had, was 50 horsemen in his army. He had 10 chariots, and he only had 10,000 footmen. That's a nothing army. He hasn't got an army anymore. He's beaten down to the point where he becomes a puppet, a vassal to the king of Syria. And this because they refused to listen to God. Remember, this is the countdown now. We're within about 80 years of self-destruction. God he's disciplining them, he's disciplining them, he's disciplining them, and when they don't take the chastisement, he'll reach a point where he'll allow them to be overcome and dispersed. It won't be that far off. At that juncture, we turn our attention back to Judah. Athaliah is the king. She's not a queen, she's a king, a monarch. We read about her. She reigned for 6 years during the years 841 through 835. She usurped the throne of Judah, obviously. You remember God's promise to David that his descendants would always sit on the throne. Well, this woman's not a descendant of David. She's a woman. She's not supposed to be on the throne. It was supposed to be a man. but she has seized power, okay? She's taken power to herself. The mother of Ahaziah saw that her son was dead. She arose and destroyed all the royal family. She was married to a king, and her two sons were kings. And when he died, the last son, who is the heir to who was the last heir to the throne, it's going to shift now to the grandchildren. She destroyed her own family. She killed her own family is what she did. She murdered all of her grandsons except for one, and that was Joash. She had to kill all of them because they were the rightful heirs to the throne. And she wanted the throne. She had to have the throne, as a matter of fact. It was a matter of self-preservation in her situation. But she actually killed all of her grandsons except for the one boy, Joash, who was hidden from her. Their biblical record in 2 Kings 11:2, Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Now, this woman is the wife of the high priest, and she hides him in, of all places, the temple, Solomon's temple. Thus they hid him from Athaliah so that he was not put to death. And he remained with her 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land. She grabbed Joash. He was a year old. She's kept him in the temple for 6 years. He's 7 years old when these events unfold. As I mentioned a moment ago, her motive was likely self-preservation. She would have been put to death. The people hated her. She was a fierce idolater. She was the cause of many of the problems of Judah having to do with idolatry. And she had to take hold of the throne, and that's what she did. The Jews resented her for various reasons. Number one, she was a foreigner. They didn't like her for that. She was an idolater. They didn't like her for that. She was involved in banning Jehovah from the land. She was the ringleader, actually. She controlled her husband, and then when her sons took the throne, she controlled her sons. And they banned the worship of Jehovah in the land. Well, you remember in Judah there was a great revival under the reign of Asa, and people worshipped Jehovah. Most of the people worshipped Jehovah. Well, at this time there's still a very large group of people following Jehovah, probably over half the nation, or about half the nation. It was a large number of people. And she was involved in banning the worship of God, so these people resented her fiercely. They couldn't go to the temple and worship God like they were supposed to. And then they didn't like her because she was a she. They didn't care for a woman sitting on David's throne. They wanted rid of her, but they couldn't get rid of her. She controlled the military. You control the military, you control the nation. You control the money, you control the nation. She had that, so she was in control, and there was nothing the followers of Jehovah could do about it. And they knew they only had one hope, and that was Joash. Joash had to live. He had to live because he was the only heir to the throne. So she stole him away. She hid him for 6 years. He's 7 years old, and now it's time to bring him out of the closet, so to speak. Let's move on. He's revealed at age 7. Athaliah was the only usurper to the throne of David. What happened was the high priest, instead of reading the narrative, the high priest, he brought Joash out. He revealed him to the people as the son of Ahaziah, that he was the rightful heir to the throne. They pronounced him king before Athaliah could get to him, and the people accepted him as king. So as quickly as possible, when she heard all the noise, the jubilation of the new 7-year-old king, she came to the temple where all this was taking place. They took her and they killed her quickly before her followers could rise up and protest what was taking place. So they took her out of the picture as quickly as possible, and now Joash becomes king. It wasn't really a revolution. It was taking back what was rightfully Joash's throne. But anyway, in the history of Israel, or Judah, you have a king who sat on David's throne for 6 years, who was a woman, who wasn't supposed to be there, but she was. So Joash is the one we want to look at. He reigned for 40 years, the year 835 to 796. There's a great deal of information about him in the scriptures. Now Joash, of course, is going to be raised by the high priest and his wife. So you can just about imagine the type of a raising he's going to get. He's going to be trained in all the ways of Jehovah to the nth degree. So what kind of a man do you expect he'll be when he matures? You would think he's going to be Jehovah's man. And he will be, at least for a while. In the 7th year of Jehu, Joash began to reign. He reigned only 40 years in Jerusalem. He reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. But because he was 7 years old, he was the monarch, he had to remain with the high priest. That was the law. The high priest was, he was in control. Can't let a 7-year-old kid run a country, even though they would probably like to. But you can't do that. Anyway, the high priest is controlling the country. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days, because Jehoiada, the priest, Jehoiada the priest, I wish his name was Fred. He instructed him in all the ways. Now, here's another thing you got to take. You see here it says, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all of his days. That's a generic statement, because as we're going to see, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days. Most of his days, yes, but not till he died. So it's a statement. It's very broad. It's encompassing, but it's not. It doesn't mean specifically that he was faithful to the Lord till the day he died. That's something you got to keep in mind sometimes. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people continued to sacrifice, make offerings on the high places. The situation, the high priest, of course, he's running the thing. What does he do? He gets idolatry out of Jerusalem, sweeps the city clean. The problem is, throughout Judah, there are high places everywhere. Over in India, we don't drive very far at all, and there'll be a place on the side of the road where people go to worship whatever God they worship there. But these places are scattered everywhere. They're like grocery stores. They're all over the place. Well, that's the way it was back at this time in Judah. There were these high places where people went and they worshiped their idols, scattered everywhere, and it was nearly impossible to wipe that out. You go through and you take a bunch of them out, and then when you move on to another area, the people are rebuilding the ones you just took out. So it's something that you just can't hardly do, and that's what's being said here. It's not for a lack of wanting to remove the high places. It was just because it was just nearly an impossible task, and it wasn't done. The kingdom was ruled through the region, as I said. That was the high priest, Fred, the high priest. He made a twofold covenant with the nation. First, he promised that the young king and his people covenanted to be the Lord's people. This was renewing their vows to God, basically. They were recommitting themselves to God. They would be faithful to the Lord. Second, the king and the people made a pact to maintain proper relationships with each other. There was going to be interaction between the government and the people, and everybody was going to be united as one in worship to Jehovah. It was a time of reviving the religion of Judaism again, the worship of Jehovah in Judah. It wasn't perfect throughout the nation, but most of the people did turn to Jehovah God during this time. But, there's a major religious revival. The Temple of Baal, for example, in Jerusalem, it was an elaborate temple, bigger than Solomon's temple. It was destroyed during this time. They took it out. The high priest was put to death for his role. Worship at Solomon's temple began once again. They cleaned it up. As a matter of fact, probably the most significant thing Joash did during his entire administration was refurbishing Solomon's temple, which was no small task. It was very, very expensive to do. And the high places, however, were not taken away. Country people out in the country, they still sacrificed, they burnt incense. It was very hard to eradicate it. The most notable achievement during his early years, repairing Solomon's temple. And that's not saying a lot, is it? I mean, of all the things that needed to be done, I mean, it was a good thing, but sadly, it's, to me at least, the most notable thing that he accomplished during his time. This accelerated, of course, religious revival. The people like to go to the temple and have their big festivals. People enjoy things like that. That's one of the things. That's why we got Christmas, for example. Back during, especially during the 4th century A.D., one of the problems, Constantine made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. Well, the pagans had to become Christians. You got to do that because the emperor requires it. So they become Christians, but the Christian religion is boring. They're pagans. They're used to all their celebrations. Idolatry has a lot of celebrations. Over in India, every time you turn around, there's a festival. It may be an isolated festival. This particular area has a festival where they worship their God, and they'll come and they'll party hardy for a week. I mean, there's always something. There are national festivals, there are local festivals, but it's a time of partying. They really have a good time, and the pagans like that. Well, in Christianity, there was nothing. There was nothing. On the first day of the week, you went together in a solemn assembly to worship God, eat the Lord's Supper, and things of that nature. So what was done was there was a festival wherein the Christians could celebrate the birth of the Christ. And of course, we know over time that turned into Christmas. They took a pagan holy day because the pagans would go and have their fun. They took a pagan holy day, and they used that day and started Christmas. And the Christians could go and have their celebration. The pagans had theirs, now the Christians had theirs. Of course, over time, more and more and more were added to it. But people enjoy those type of celebratory experiences. Well, that's what's going on here. They're going back to Solomon's temple. You got the week-long festival that you go to. These festivals, sometimes they last a week or 2 weeks. They weren't one-day affairs. They were very long, lengthy affairs because people traveled from great distances to be there. to go to the temple, for example, on the Day of Atonement, for some people, like our Lord's family, that could have been a 4-week investment of time to do all that was required to do. So you're involved with the festival for an entire month. And when they restarted the worship in Solomon's temple, the people were excited. They came together. They've got fellowship with one another, and they have a good time. Okay, and it unites the people together. It solidifies their relationship with one another, and of course, it solidifies their relationship with God. What's the point? The nation is being strengthened in their religious conviction to God. Now, this is Judah. Israel's going in the other direction, the northern kingdom. They're moving away from God. They're not listening. Judah's still listening. When God speaks, they still listen. And this is the difference going on between these two nations. It's hard to say two nations because it's really one, but this is what's taking place. And you need to understand it. The nation finally apostatized. The high priest died, and Joash underwent a change of attitude. He was 130 years old when he died, the high priest. And, of course, his influence over Joash died with him. And now Joash was, his counselors were other people, including pagans. Okay? He's a politician, right? Don't forget that. A king is a politician. And politicians try to keep their nations united. And a lot of times politicians do what they feel they have to do in order to keep unity. Well, that's what Joash is going to do. He's going to do the exact same thing. His faith is obviously unstable. He was not. He was what James talked about, chapter 1, verse 6. James said, "He who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind." That's the kind of a fellow Joash was when it came to his faith. You can go back, you can study it in Scripture. You can also study it in the rabbinical teachings. But he never was completely devoted to Jehovah. He was devoted on a superficial level, but never much more than that. A double-minded man like Joash, he's unstable in all his ways, and that's what happened. The high priest held it together because Joash looked to him for advice. But he dies, and now his advice is coming from a lot of different people. The buck stops on his desk now. He has to make the decisions, and he's not very good at it. He caved in to the pressure from the devotees of Baal, which was a very bad move. Remember, the high priest had destroyed the temple. He had killed the high priest. He outlawed Baal worship in Judah. But now Joash is making a deal with the devil. He's a politician. He's trying to maintain stability in the nation. He grew harder over time. He did. His heart grew harder. And that's one of the problems. We're warned about who we associate with. If we associate with people of the wrong or a different mentality than we are, there's a danger that their mentality may become our mentality. Their doubts. A lot of times, a Christian, for example, may have good friends who are atheists, and they may constantly talk about things like evolution. You know, I don't know how you can believe in God and the creation of the world, and the world being less than 10,000 years old. Science has proven that that's not the case, that the world is actually millions of years old. With all this scientific evidence, I don't understand how you can believe what you believe. And you associate, these are your best friends, on and on and on. Little by little by little, they're chipping away at what faith you have, okay? and they're causing you to doubt whether or not your religion is true, because they seem to know what they're talking about. And when they seem to know what they're talking about, the faith we have becomes weak, and we begin to doubt. And when we begin to doubt, we lose our conviction. And when we lose our conviction, we lose everything, our devotion to God. And it's something that can happen to anybody. And that's why we're warned that evil companionships corrupts good morals. It can have an effect on us. Well, this was Joash. He started hanging with the devil, so to speak, and over time, his heart grew harder. He grew further and further and further away from Jehovah. He didn't grow to become a devotee of Baal, but he lost what faithfulness he had to Jehovah and his zeal for maintaining the religion of the Jews. The Spirit of God, because Joash had become so hard over time, the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Fred, the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, "Thus says God," right in front of everybody, "Joash, why do you break the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper?" You can't prosper doing that. You know, instead of moving forward like everyone was, you're going to start moving backwards because you have forsaken the Lord. Now he has forsaken you. This is the situation, okay? It took time. Slowly but surely, his faith crumbled over time, and he got to the point where he had forsaken God, and God had forsaken him. And that always means big trouble. Well, Joash, now remember, this is Zechariah, who is the son of the high priest. The high priest raised Joash. So they were raised together, right? Joash and Zechariah, who is now the prophet priest, were raised together by the high priest. They weren't brothers, blood brothers, but they were raised like brothers, weren't they? Okay, you know, the love that would exist between the two, that did exist, okay? And now the high priest, or the prophet, has stood before Joash and all the people. He's denounced Joash because of his activities, especially allowing Baal worship once again. And they conspired against him by the command of the king. The king ordered his men to conspire against Zedekiah. He wants him out of the picture. And they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Okay, Joash was upset, and he killed this man, the son of the man who raised him, a man that he was raised with himself. And now he's killed him. This is how hard he's become, okay? Remember, he was faithful to the Lord all the days of his life? Well, not really. On the end of his life, he became hard-hearted. This was really towards the end of his life, but he had a change of altitude, and it was sad. Now, in Matthew 23:35, let me bring this up. Jesus was telling the Jewish people that they were cut off by God because of their sinfulness. They had rejected God, and now God was rejecting them. Remember? This was his last time in the temple. He denounced the activities of the Jewish leaders and the nation. And here's what he said: "On you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel," Cain and Abel, "to the blood of Zechariah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar." This may have been the Zechariah he was talking about. I don't know that for sure. Most scholars think it was. I'm not convinced of that. I'm thinking it might have been the father of John the Baptizer. But this is why they think he's the one. The king, Jesus is talking about the rebellious spirit, okay? These men were claiming that they weren't like their fathers. They weren't evil like their fathers were. And what Jesus is telling them is that they possessed the same spirit of their fathers, only much worse. Because they were going to murder the Son of God, which was by far worse than anything their fathers had done. But anyway, this may be that Zechariah. Anyway, Joash the king did not remember the kindness Fred, Zechariah's father, had shown him, but he killed his son. That's bad. When you get to the point you're that hard-hearted, that's bad that you could kill that man for those actions. And when he was dying, this is Zechariah now, he said, "May the Lord see and avenge." And the Lord did see, and the Lord did avenge. In the spring of that same year, in 2 Chronicles 24:24, the army of the Syrians came into Judah, into Jerusalem, with a small company of men. It wasn't a big army. Judah at this time, of course, is strong. The Syrians at this time are not. And the Lord delivered a very great army into their hand, because they had forsaken the Lord God of their fathers, so they executed judgment against Joash. In this situation, the Syrians had a small army. Judah had a very great army, but God gave the pagan Syrians the ability to overcome the more mighty Judean armies. God is working through the Syrians to punish his people again. He did that with the northern kingdom. We just talked about it. And now he's doing it again with the southern kingdom. God can use pagan nations in order to carry out his will. He refers to the Syrians, or I should say the Assyrians. He refers to the Assyrians as his rod of chastisement. He calls them his ministers. Okay, they're the ministers of God. What does that mean? They're executing the will of God. They're serving God. They don't know it. God does this providentially. I mean, he doesn't tell them what to do, but he can make it possible, and he does. But he gives Judah over to an inferior nation. Because Judah wouldn't listen anymore. That gives me chills sometimes when I think about that. Sometimes we think of a mighty nation being infallible. But God took a small army and overcame a mighty nation. And it was his people. So, all that military stuff, it really doesn't mean anything, does it? Not if God's fighting against you. If God's fighting against you, you lose the battle. And it's something to think about. Something we all should think about. Anyway, the death of Joash, he was wounded in battle. His own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the sons of Jehoiada, Fred, the priest, and they killed Joash on his bed. The people were still mad because he had killed the priest. They understood their defeat by the inferior army to be the displeasure of God being carried out providentially. And they held Joash responsible for it because he was the one that executed the prophet. So he died. They buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. He wasn't worthy to be buried there. They just buried him in a cemetery. So Joash, what a wonderful beginning this man had. A great beginning. He He had the best raising a man could have asked for as far as being a devotee to God. You wouldn't get a better raising than he got from the high priest. He couldn't have had a better example than he got through the high priest. In all the days of the high priest, as long as he lived, he was actually the one who was ruling the nation through Joash. Joash apparently loved him, he respected him, and he turned to him for guidance as he tried to run the nation. All of that going with him. And then near the end, he lost his heart and eventually his soul. It's so sad. A good beginning isn't enough. A body's got to end well. We've got to finish well. If we don't finish well, it doesn't matter how good our beginning was. And we see that in the case of Joash. And it's so sad. It's so sad. I just hate it for him. The Spirit now is going to turn his spotlight back to Israel. This is the way he does through the Old Testament. We look at Judah, then we'll look at Israel, we'll go back to Judah, all the way through. And you've got to keep that in mind when you're reading the Old Testament. You've got to know who the authors are writing about, which nation is being discussed at any given time. Jehoahaz became Israel's 12th king. He reigned 17 years, but he doesn't occupy a lot of space in the Bible. Obviously not a very significant person. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He followed the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. He did not depart from them. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel more than it already was. And he gave them continually into the hand of the king of Syria, into the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael. Just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Then Jehoahaz sought the favor of the Lord, and the Lord listened to him. Here was a man, God does not hear the prayer of sinners. Whoa, hold the phone. This guy's a sinner, right? God is angry with him because he's a sinner. And he prayed to God, and what happened? God listened. God does not hear the prayer of a sinner. I've heard that all my life. He heard that one. What does that mean? God will not hear the prayer of a sinner. When we ask God for personal favors, if we're not listening to God and we ask God for personal favors, he's not going to grant our petitions. But that's not what Jehoahaz is looking for. He's not looking for personal favor. He's looking for something to stay the nation. Okay, it's for the sake of the nation that he prays. Therefore, the Lord gave Israel a Savior, as bad as they were. And I mean, they were bad. They were worshiping Baal. They were worshiping the Asherahs. They were not worshiping Jehovah at all. And whatever worship there was, it was false worship because they were worshiping in Dan and Bethel instead of Jerusalem. Everything in Israel was wrong. And God listened to them, and God blessed them. Even in the 11th hour of their existence as a nation, he still listened to their petition and gave it to them. Will God forgive a person who's dying, who asks for forgiveness? If that person has a penitent heart, he will. God doesn't want people to die the death. He wants us to live. And if we can find it in our heart to turn to God, God listens to us, even at a late hour. We see that in this example right here. I didn't know it was that time. But, notice, despite the favor, they did not depart from their sins. Even though God gave them victory over the Syrians, they kept on living the way they were. They would not listen to Jehovah. And I think that's amazing.